Hi, welcome to SBR Forum Videos. I'm Peter Loshak. We are continuing our Super Bowl 48 coverage right now. It's Tuesday, January 21st. We got our Super Bowl matchup. We got our opening lines, and right now we got Troy West from allplayswin.com on the line with us. He's going to give us his initial thoughts on the matchup and the opening lines. Troy, thanks for being back with us.
Hey, you bet, Pete. What a fantastic NFL playoffs we've had. I know we're 6-2 on the SBR forums, 7-1 overall on our website, allplayswin.com. We've been on a terrific run now for well over a month and a half. Really encourage viewers to come take a look, and what a fantastic Super Bowl we have, Pete.
This is one of the most interesting Super Bowls in recent memory. First of all, because the line is so competitive, right? And it's been a long time since we've had a Super Bowl with a near pick'em line. And the other thing that jumps out at me is it's just like, you know, normally, you know, you're comparing like two relatively balanced teams, and then you factor in the spread. But here you just got huge strength against huge strength, not even really a line to factor in. It's almost a pick'em game. It's just basically Denver's offense against Seattle's defense, right?
Yeah, it's very similar. It's an interesting game, Pete. It really is. You get the two number ones, which never happens. You get the number one offense versus the number one defense. Never happens. But one thing I think you really got to look at, Pete, is what Seattle has done against teams very similar to Denver.
Right.
Look at the New Orleans Saints. The New Orleans Saints put up 15 points in 2 games against the Seattle Seahawks. You know, arguably Peyton Manning definitely better than Drew Brees, but you know how much better. This is a pocket tile passer. The guys that have hurt Seattle's defense throughout the year has been those little more mobile quarterbacks. So I think that's something to take into perspective is how Peyton Manning, you know, the guy never seems to run the ball, and Seattle's going to be able to drop into coverage. What kind of effect does that have on a guy like Peyton Manning?
All right, well, let me get your take on this. The first thing that everyone's discussing here is the weather, right? People are saying, you know, if it's bad weather, you go with the Seahawks. If it's nice weather, go with Denver.
You know, you do have to look at the weather, and I think the worse the weather, definitely Seahawk advantage. But, you know, I know Peyton Manning, you know, he's getting his heckled for the way he's played in cold weather. But, you know, as of late, he's looked a lot better. I know that weather is going to be substantially worse than it's been in Denver, but I'm not so sure that weather is going to be a huge, huge factor to really pinpoint who you're going to be picking in this game, Pete. I think there's a lot more tangibles and variables to look at rather than the weather, at least when you're breaking down this one.
All right, and what do you make of the line movement, right? It opened about pick'em. The early line movement was in favor of Seattle. Then it swung pretty heavily in favor of Denver. Now it's Denver -2, and from what I'm seeing and hearing, it seems to me that like the public is favoring Denver, at least to start.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, Pete. I was surprised that it switched like that. But I think as you get closer and closer to the Super Bowl, I think that line is going to creep down. I was actually shocked to see Denver continue to move this way, Pete. You've got to remember, and I know people aren't looking at this, but the fact that Percy Harvin is going to be coming back and 100% healthy against Denver, I think that means something. A lot of people will laugh and say, oh, come on, the guy's only played 37 plays all year. But this is a game he's going to be ready to play. And what an unbelievable opportunity, Pete, to prove to people that he was worth the money to come into the Super Bowl and play a great game. And, you know, no Sean Moreno's banged up for Denver. Chris Harris, their starting quarterback, we know he's out. So injuries you got to look at as well, too, Pete.
All right, what about just leadership at quarterback, right? Is this just sort of like a done deal because Peyton Manning, you know, has the experience and Russell Wilson maybe doesn't quite have what it takes at this time this year?
Well, you bring up a fair point. The edge at quarterbacks, no doubt, with the Denver Broncos, but leadership's definitely not one of the things that Russell Wilson's lacking. And so I think this is a game where, you know, you look at the leadership roles, both these teams are going to bring their A game. And I know that the Seattle Seahawks will have it, especially on defense, Pete. This is a team with numerous leaders on their defense, Richard Sherman, Earl Thomas. Their linebacking core is phenomenal. So it's a little bit different. Seattle's been able to get by at this point with average quarterback play. This is a guy that does just enough to win. But, you know, it reminds you of the Ravens of last year where defense won them a Super Bowl. The Ravens of the past where defense won them a Super Bowl. Can Seattle get just enough quarterback play from Russell Wilson and have their defense do the work to win them a Super Bowl? So, you know, leadership is going to give Denver a slight edge in that department. But again, I don't think it's enough to look at who you're going to be taking to win this football game.
All right, and then what's your take on the total? Because, you know, the total's right now about 48. And first of all, we know that the public loved betting, you know, Denver overs basically every game during the regular season and in the playoffs. And this is a very low total for a Denver game. It's the Super Bowl. The public likes to bet the over in the Super Bowl anyway. Does it not surprise you that this line is that the total's a little bit low where it is, 48?
To me, it almost seems about dead on, Pete. We were
Mm-hmm.
talking about this yesterday. You've got to think Seattle's going to get points. You got to remember, Pete, the last few games, Seattle had to go against the top 5 defense in Arizona, a top 5 defense with the New Orleans Saints, and a top 5 defense with the San Francisco 49ers. This team really hasn't had a break in terms of defense. They go against the Denver team, who ranks 19th in defense. So you've got to think Seattle's going to get some points in this game. I really think they'll be in the 20s. And then Denver's got to be good to get 20, right? You would think so. Mm-hmm. So I think it's right around the 48 mark. I would be shocked if either team touched 30. I don't think that's a possibility here. But both teams right in the mid-20s, I think that's a very fair possibility in my mind, Pete.
Right, I hear you, but it's like, even if 48 is the right number, it seems to me that the books are going to get just overloaded with overaction. So even if they do have the right number, I mean, the risk, I'm guessing, is going to be huge on the over. They're going to need the under huge. Maybe I'm wrong, but that just seems obvious to me.
No, they could. And, Pete, I mean, you and I both wouldn't be shocked to see a 24-21 game or a 24-17 game or a 24-20 game. I think one of these teams could be held under 25, and if that's the case, it's probably going to go under. So I think they do have that line set at a point where they're going to get some overaction, and the under is a strong possibility. But it is an interesting. I think it's dang near close. I wouldn't even be surprised to see a push on this one.
All right. So when you sit down to cap this game, is this basically just going to be about Denver's offense versus Seattle's defense, and pick the one who's going to have the upper hand, and then you got your winner?
A lot of it has to do with that, Pete, but I think you really need to go back and look at the teams that Peyton Manning torched and the teams that he didn't torch, and who they lost to and the teams they beat. I think that actually does play a factor in this one. Peyton Manning has not seen a secondary like Seattle all year long, not even close. You can't make an argument that he's seen a secondary or a defense like Seattle. Seattle, you could argue that they've seen some pretty good passing offenses. They've seen the Saints twice. I'm not going to argue the New York Giants, but this is a team, they shut out Eli Manning earlier in the year. They've seen teams that can throw the football, and they've done a fantastic job. Nobody has been able to go against Seattle's secondary and throw the ball over the field. The fact that they can drop back into coverage all game long and not necessarily have to worry about Peyton Manning's legs, and I don't think that front four is going to be scared of Loshak Moreno coming out of the backfield either. So it's going to be really interesting to be able to see Seattle secondary just be able to drop back into coverage comfortably and potentially shut down the Denver receiving corps. And Pete, one other thing I like to look at is you look at the style of receiver that the Denver Broncos have. The Eric Deckers, the Wes Welkers. They're not the Michael Crabtrees, the Vernon Davises, the Jimmy Grahams, the Anquan Boldens, the big physical guys that Seattle's been able to shut down. You got to remember Richard Sherman and these guys are big physical guys. Denver hasn't seen that, so I think that plays a little bit of a factor as well, Pete. The big physical corners against the smaller, craftier receivers that Seattle hasn't seen. They've gone against much tougher receivers all season long.
All right, well, it sounds like you've almost already made up your mind that you're going to go with Seattle. That's not a homer lean, is it? Have you made up your mind already?
I will say we have a little bit of a lean towards Seattle. There's still some more homework to be done. You got to look at injury reports as the weeks progress. But, I definitely think the signs point in Seattle's favor. This almost seems like a team of destiny all year. And just the sure fact, P, I don't care what the argument is. The fact that Percy Harvin will be coming back, he had a concussion against the Saints, but this guy's an impact player on special teams. He's an impact, another wideout that Seattle can throw to. So I think that's an X factor. I really do. Denver, on the other hand, they lost Chris Harris, who's their top corner. Moreno's got bruised ribs. I think he'll be back to play. But, just looking at all the real important key factors, I truly think it leans in Seattle's favor, at least for the moment.
Well, thanks so much, Troy West from allplayswin.com for your initial thoughts on the opening line, Super Bowl 48. Very interested to see what your official pick winds up finally being, and we will talk to you more in depth about Super Bowl 48 later on this week.